As a nonprofit association, we rely on the support of our members. And today's session is made possible in part thanks to our fantastic, long-standing member, Invest Northern Ireland. So that said, I'll hand it over to Andrea Hawhian, who's the Senior Vice President at Invest Northern Ireland here in the United States, to introduce today's session. Andrea, over to you.
Thank you, Tamara. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's seminar. Invest Northern Ireland is delighted to sponsor the Putting People First series of webinars presented by British American Business. We are particularly pleased to support today's session, Leading in a Time of Crisis. As you know, Invest Northern Ireland is the economic development agency for Northern Ireland, and our role is to support international trade in addition to helping global companies establish centres of excellence in Northern Ireland to support their international growth and success. I am delighted to have worked with many member companies of British American Business and to have helped them establish nearshore centres in Northern Ireland to enable them to accelerate business growth, maximise profitability, and facilitate recruitment, training, and R&D. Please do reach out to me if I can be of any help to your business, particularly as we navigate these challenging times. Without further ado, I am delighted to introduce today's moderator and fellow alumna of Queen's University Belfast, Tessa Breslin. Tessa is the Managing Director of YSC Americas. Tessa holds relationships with a variety of clients across industries, focusing on individual assessment and development, coaching and team facilitation. She is a chartered psychologist with the British Psychological Society and a member of Health Professionals Councils and the American Psychological Association. Her special interests lie in helping individuals with high potential, particularly women, realize their ambitions. Tessa graduated from Queen's University Belfast with a first-class honours degree in psychology and went on to win a scholarship to complete her MSc in occupational psychology. She began her career in consulting in London, working with blue-chip clients on their communications, internal branding, and change programs. She moved to the aviation industry into employee engagement, learning, and development roles, and ultimately led the talent agenda across an international airports business. Tessa then headed up talent management development for a facilities management company with responsibilities for performance, talent, and leadership development for 48,000 people. Like myself, Tessa is originally from Northern Ireland. Tessa lives in New York and likes to escape to a holiday home in Donegal in Ireland. Tessa has 3 small children and is married to a West Ham fan and enjoys serving on the board of trustees of a liberal arts university in New Jersey. Tessa, over to you.
Thank you, Andrea, for the gracious introduction. And you're going to have 2 Northern Irish accents today, so I don't think your Thursdays are going to get any better. As Andrea says, I have the privilege of heading up the YSC business in North America. We're a leadership strategy organisation. Before I jump in and introduce our 2 panelists today, I do have a few house rules to share with you that will hopefully make everything run nice and smoothly for us today. So the discussion portion will take about 30 to 35 minutes. You will be, our listeners, on listen mode only. Your mics are muted. We do encourage you to send in questions. There is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you hover over it on the Zoom menu, you can submit your questions there. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can, but apologies in advance if we don't manage to cover everything that comes through. And finally, the session is being recorded and you can request a copy of that recording should you choose afterwards. I'd like to introduce our panelists today. We have Shane Atchison and Catherine Harrington, and I'll just hand over, Catherine, to you if you'd like to introduce yourself to the group.
Sure, thank you. I am the CAO of CLS Bank. We settle foreign exchange trading for 18 of the world's largest currencies. Average daily volumes going through our systems is around 6 trillion. I'm the CAO. I look after everything to do with our human resources, our communications, both internally and externally, and our workplace services. And a particular friend of BAB, having spent 16 years in New York and recently moved back to London. So,
thank you, Catherine. Thank you. Shane, over to you.
Hello, thanks for the introduction. My name is Shane Atchison. I'm the CEO of Wunderman Thompson North America. We're a fairly large agency. We've got about 5,000 people in North America, ranging from data, technology, communications, and commerce. I live here in Seattle with my wife and a 13 and 15-year-old who are still asleep right now, which is beautiful at 8 in the morning. I think I have another hour still to be productive.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you. So in terms of getting started today, we'd like to just talk a little bit about leading in times of crisis. There we go. So I think the first thing to say about this topic is the leadership in times of crisis. We find across the industries and sectors that we work in, that leadership is often the differentiator. So being able to nail this leading through crisis is quite strategically and commercially important for organizations. And in the course of today, what we would like to be able to do is talk with you about leading effectively in constantly evolving and complicated crisis. So the outlook is pretty murky. It's very hard to get clear visibility of where this is going to go. We also want to talk with you about the key shifts that we are seeing, and we will frame the conversation around those shifts from responding to crisis right through to transformation and rebuilding in the new world. And we'll talk to you also about maintaining momentum and shaping that new normal, and how do you keep your teams on track as you go through that. The first thing I just want to share with you was we've been talking with our clients quite a lot over the last few months, and just to speak into conversations about just how are you doing, what's going on. And what we're hearing from leaders a lot is, number one, they're being told a lot about what they need to do, but what they're not being told is how to do it. And hopefully through seminars like this today, we'll be able to shine some light on some of the how. How do you, create momentum? How do you rebuild in the current circumstance? The second thing we're hearing from leaders is that they're being pulled down and not able to look up and out. And the pulling down is coming from two places in particular. One is around a dip in productivity, which means people are getting down into delivery mode just to get things going. We're also seeing some leaders being pulled down as a way of trying to connect with their people and feeling that they have to be in the trenches with their people. The challenge is that it creates great risk around being able to be forward-looking and strategic and stepping back and really limits the ability to look ahead. The third one here around dips in productivity, we're kind of seeing it in a couple of different places. Leaders are saying that they're seeing about a 40 to 50% dip in different places. And the challenges that they're seeing is, one is the degree of distraction, especially for people who are working from home perhaps for the first time ever. And that can be just, as a function of their setup at home. We're also seeing challenges around people feeling anxious, worried, and just not able to bring their A game all of the time because of everything else that is going on. There's a real psychological burden to this pandemic. And we're also anticipating that it is going to be challenging for organizations, because we're all in different parts of the cycle here, where there is a return to work. It's like the first day after holiday. You're never quite your most productive because you're busy connecting with people. But layer on that the new rules and regulations around social distancing and how we need to operate in the new world. That is also going to create challenges when we do potentially get back into the office. We will not be at full throttle, and we should expect a dip in productivity there. And then the final place that we're anticipating some challenges here, or leaders are telling us, is around performance management of this financial year, and whether it comes at the end of this calendar year or into the next, that how do we fairly discuss, recognize performance in this time. And if it's not done with soul, we could potentially see another dip in morale and productivity around that time. And then the last part that we're hearing from leaders is around this loss of felt empowerment and initiative. And some of that is a function of the anxiety that people are going through. And some of it is a function of some leadership styles which are more directive and controlling in a crisis situation. And that has merit in some places, but the downstream implication is that people don't feel that they're empowered or that they can take the initiative the way they might once have. So what are the successful characteristics in leadership look like right now? And these four are based on a number of different sources. One is recent literature review the body of, we've assessed over 50,000 leaders in our 30 years of existence. We have a pretty good read on leadership and resilience and what leadership looks like in crisis. And also some psychological research around stressors and derailers. But the themes are around authenticity, you know, the need for integrity, the need for showing up consistently, the need for empathy and humility, and putting the company's interest before your own is one that is ringing out loud and clear. The second one is around being courageous, you know, being able to make the tough calls, deal with the tough issues, leaning into challenges rather than pulling away from them, and being able to persevere and make some of the tough trade-offs that need to be made. The third is around objective judgment. And this is quite an interesting one because it's been able to make an accurate assessment of the threat levels. It looks like people being able to have a degree of healthy pessimism, lower optimism, and no or low risk of overconfidence or arrogance. So being able to stay attuned, listen out, but you know, have a very calculated view of how things are going to pan out. And when we think about objective judgment, we're thinking about people's decision making. So you don't want people who are highly intuitive, who are going to rely on gut and perhaps the playbook that has gone before. And you don't want someone who is highly divergent and decisive, who's not going to keep the conversation open long enough to make a considered decision. And the last one is around adaptability. And this is about openness, flexibility, be able to say you've got it wrong, not thinking you have all the answers, and not, you know, I mentioned playbook earlier, but not feeling that you've got it worked out already. And we'll talk more about adaptability at the end, because this is going to be key going forward. So in terms of the framework for today, we said we were going to talk about leading through crisis, and we've anchored this around initially responding to the crisis, secondly around letting go and transitioning, thirdly around radical reinvention, and fourthly around rebuilding and leading the transformation. So if we look first of all to the response to the crisis, I'm going to turn to Catherine here. And Catherine, just ask you about, you know, you talked about the volume of settlements that you're doing every night. Talk to us a bit about your response to the crisis and how well business continuity planning stacked up in the face of the crisis.
Sure, yeah. I'm sure for all of us, everyone listening, a global pandemic was not front and center in our business continuity planning. And we, despite the fact that our BCM team had been doing a really good job staying connected to this when it first started becoming apparent that there was an issue in Asia. I think some of us didn't really realize till a number of weeks later that this was actually going to be extremely serious. And so we jumped in quite quickly, a number of us, to elevate the speed and frequency at which we were meeting to plan for effectively a distributed workforce. We had never, though, had a situation where all 4 of our sites that can operate this settlement, and just for those of you who aren't aware, we need to settle our service every night because we are a financial market utility, and if we don't work, then it has huge liquidity impacts on the running of the whole financial market. We'd never had a situation where we felt that one of those sites would be down. So our tech teams and security teams and operations teams had to get done in 3 weeks what we'd hitherto thought was unattainable, which was being able to run our settlement service remotely. And we had to pull in a crisis management team and make sure that we had the right governance and structure around that. So it was that first kind of period of time where all you want to do is kind of stabilize the threat. It's that kind of respond to the crisis. And then once we'd kind of worked through that, which was a period of weeks, we obviously wanted to then start moving very quickly into thinking about the how and the kind of the we aspect of the model. It was very easy to focus on what we needed to get done immediately, but how did we then think about how we were going to equip our workforce and our leaders to operate in a very different way. And that's where we kind of started doing a lot of work around resilience and agility and adaptability that you've just referenced. So,
thank you, Catherine. And just to talk a bit about resilience, we have been talking about resilience for the past 4 or 5 years, and we have a scientific, I'll share the model with you in a second, but there's a scientific underpinning to this. And we very specifically talk about resilience rather than grit or tenacity, because we see it as much more holistic. We see it as developable, we see it as malleable. And in terms of building a culture of resilience, there's a couple of things that I would put to you. One is around walking the talk, and this is really about, start at the top, it has got to be role models, because I think leaders can talk a good resilience game, but if they're not actually practicing it and they're sending emails at all hours and are frazzled and a bit volatile and all the rest, there are challenges because people will see the dissonance there. The second is about resilience being beyond well-being. We all know the importance of, good diet and exercise and sleep, but this is also about what are the strategies that you have to deal with the challenges and the changes and that you're facing into, and how do you actually manage your energy and your response in tricky times. The third is around, we don't always do what is good for us. It is good for, it's easy to say it, but, actually to make that a habit can be a real challenge. And people need a personal approach to this, because what works for me wouldn't necessarily work for Catherine or for Shane. And we need to think about what is going to be helpful for us. The fourth point here about there's no quick fix, that's not quite what people want to hear, but resilience is a habit, and we need to think about the psychology of change and allow time to embed changes and integrate it into everyday practices. And the last point here about it's not all about you, and this is where leading in crisis is really important, because the challenge and the opportunity here is around managing your own resilience, but also being able to cultivate it in others. I'm just going to share this with you. It's a model of resilience. As I say, we've been working on this for a while. And the reason I share it with you, because I think there's a couple of key things to think about within the current context. The first is that we see resilience as about kind of the growth, the adaptation, the learning that happens through all of this. We think about it also in terms of what the leader does, which you can see in the inner grey piece here about fostering support, cultivating confidence, promoting striving, enabling recovery, facilitating change, as well as what they do as individuals in that purpley colour. And I think just in the current context, if I take support, for example, it's easy to underestimate the value of the 5-minute water cooler conversation, those little micro boosts of support that you get throughout the day when you swing past reception and have a kind word with someone. And in the current context, the challenge is how do you recreate those corridor conversations virtually, and those small connections, how do you get them to happen? If you think about the confidence piece, again, it's often through connection from others that we actually get affirmed and get little boosts to confidence. So what to do in the current context? Over-index on some of that positive reinforcement, the positive feedback, because people will need that to help them connect and get that motivation going. We talk about striving. This is where you might see grit or tenacity coming through. But the criticality around striving here is about actually adopting a degree of strategic perspective to this. And it's hard in the current situations, especially if people are goal-oriented and the goals seem to be shifting all the time. How do you keep it manageable for people, give them something that they can actually connect with? And then recovery, a lot of people will be able to talk about what tops them up and what takes away. But in current circumstance, keep it manageable. Pick 2 or 3 things that's going to enable you to re-energize and top yourself up. And the last piece around adapting, this is about how do you find new ways to thrive, because we're not going back to the old world. So how are we actually going to thrive in this new evolving world? So let me just pause there for a second, and Shane, I'll turn to you first. Talk to me a bit about how you're managing your own resilience, and how do you encourage resilience behaviours in your team and your leaders?
Yeah, I think being in Seattle, maybe we have 31 offices in North America, in tier one and tier two cities, and Seattle was hit kind of most aggressively and earliest in the States by COVID. And so, we had a next door neighbor who died from COVID in week 2. And he had all the conditions you would imagine, elderly, pre-existing medical condition. So, but it came made it very real for our family and our community very, very fast. And that helped, in a weird way, that helped, I guess, me as a leader to process how big a deal this is and how serious this is, and that helped enable us to kind of get ahead of it, as the rest of the country kind of came to it as we move forward. I think the modeling the how you're feeling and sharing that has been very important for us. I do a weekly email every Friday to all 5,000 employees, and that formula we'll typically have kind of the typical things you would have in a weekly company email: what's going on in the business, and maybe something I've observed or experienced that week. And I wrote a note about a month ago that I said, I've been preaching that we all need to take time for ourselves. We all need to get the exercise, get the mental health breaks, get your recharges, as you say, Tessa. And I had probably been sprinting 14 hours a day for 6 weeks, 8 weeks straight, and I wasn't in good enough shape to do that. And so I booked out that I was going to go for a workout 3 days a week during lunch, doing 11 o'clock to 1. And I went on a bike ride one day, and I was waiting to go on my bike ride because I had just one more email to do, one more Teams call to do. My wife walked by, and she's an engineer who's very matter of fact, and she said, "Thought you were going on your bike ride. Go get out there." So I did. It was a 45-minute bike ride, and there's no internet connectivity on this bike ride other than 2-minute little spell. And during that 2-minute spell, my phone rings. I stop the bike against my inner voice's advice. I pick up the phone, and it's our global CEO calling me. And I thought, well, I should probably take it. So I'm on the side of a dirt road, take the phone call from my boss, my boss's boss actually, and I could hear birds in the background on his voice. He lives in London. I said, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm going on my daily walk. I got to take a break from all this work talk." I said, "Well, we're talking about work." He's like, "Yeah, it feels better when I'm walking." So I shared that story to my staff and said, in this moment, of kind of vulnerability, where I took a break from work in a very high pressure moment, I took a call, during that break from my CEO. He didn't know I was on a bike ride, and it was fine. Everything was okay. And I didn't think much of that story, but I probably had 80 emails within 10 minutes of me sending that email out to staff, people saying, "Thanks for telling us, how you felt. You felt nervous, that you felt awkward. You didn't tell the CEO that you were on a bike ride." And just, I think that positive reinforcement about being authentic, about being vulnerable, and then doing what you preach as well to your staff, I think was really key. I want to do that every week, right? But in that moment, it was helpful. And then I got a call from the global chief technology officer, who was the third person on that call. He said, "I have to tell you something. I got this call out of the blue from the CEO when you were on it, Shane. I was playing tennis with my son, but I didn't want to tell you guys that." That was 8 o'clock at night, his time. So we all have our backstories, and I think the more we can recognize that and respect it, and not be afraid to share what's going on, even if it's vulnerable, I think is very helpful.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you for that. And I think it's normalizing it, because we're not really having work-life fit or balance or anything like it. It's like work-life blend at the moment. And I think we have to keep it real about, what are we doing to look after ourselves, because you cannot pour from an empty cup, and we've got to kind of take care of ourselves. Catherine, let me turn it to you. What's going on in terms of building resilience in yourself and your leadership team at CLS?
Sure. I mean, obviously, all of the things that Shane has referenced. In addition, though, I think the piece around the authenticity and empathy and meeting our employees kind of where they're at. It is, as you pointed out, Tessa, very easy to just assume that how you might individually be reacting or how the distractions in your life are impacting you mean that that's a similar model across the organization, and it's absolutely not. We found even on our executive team that there are usually 10 different views on how we might move forward on things. So I kind of played that back to them and said, we've all got 10 different views as to how we might approach, you know, our return to work strategy or the future of work strategy, etc. Imagine now with our, you know, nearly 1,000 employees, how many different views we're going to have. So it's encouraging all of our leaders at all levels to really be thinking about understanding where people are at. And just remembering that how we treat people and treat each other at this moment will define how we are remembered as an organization. You know, there's a lot of material out there at the moment about, you know, people who are doing it very well. Certain organizations are doing it very well and very publicly. And then you hear, I've heard some pretty horror stories in some other industries where people are still kind of being told that they are still being measured on every 5 minutes because they might be in a billable profession, etc. And that is definitely not something at CLS that we are operating. We want to make sure that everybody feels, and it is a feel rather than a think, but everybody feels that they are supported and that their individual circumstances can be you know, absolutely woven into our work patterns. And that will, and I know we're going to get on to Tessa in a little while about the future of work, but that it's about how do we take the good things that are coming out of this crisis actually and then embedding them, because some good things, despite the fact we're now in a bit of a fog, some good things will come out of it. And I think resilience in this definition is as much about not just our ability to cope and get through it, but how we build a resilient model for the organization moving forward.
That's great, Catherine. And I love that piece just talking about, you know, the 10 different views around the leadership team table, because one of the things that we want to start to talk about is really around the transitioning and how do we enable organizations to build off some of the things that they have done well before, so that they can leverage off that and springboard off that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about letting go and transitioning, and particularly I'm going to focus on inclusion and diversity. Because one of the challenges that we have with inclusion and diversity, because there's been so much positive work done, so much investment, so many commitments, so much time devoted to creating more equitable workplaces. But crisis leadership can actually operate in opposition to some D&I principles. And I think that's really important just to take a moment just to think about that. And we could actually be unintentionally undoing some of the good stuff that we have been doing around inclusion and diversity. And part of that is, you know, in a crisis, people do tend to converge. They do tend to lean on familiar relationships or people who are stylistically similar, and just not pause and reflect and think about actually what's the best way to be doing this and how do we actually hold true to our D&I principles. I think the things to think about here around diversity and inclusion is to just reflect at this moment about the early communications and decisions that are made and how do they stack up against your communicated D&I values. Like, to what extent have you been on or off the mark in your own estimation? I think it's also important to think about identifying and supporting populations that may be disproportionately affected. And I think parents have been identified, and there's been much written about parents, but we should not forget, you know, military veterans, international people who are not, you know, in their country of origin, the Asian community, the Black community, people in rural communities, people who might be dealing with addiction recovery, the LGBTQIA community who are proportionately more likely to be in frontline service type roles. So I think it's time just to stop and think, and some of these populations will be visible, some of this will be invisible, and just to kind of retune now that we've perhaps got a little bit more space, and just to be thoughtful of that. And really what this is gearing up to is really thinking about practicing conscious inclusion. And where I'd like to take us to is just talking a bit about conscious inclusion. We have a validated model around conscious inclusion. You can see it here around curiosity, courage, and connection. And really, it's about the intentional practice of this, particularly at this time. And really, what sits underneath all of this is psychological safety. But the principles that sit here are ones that you will see in, the conversations that we've had already about the type of leadership that we need, courageousness, the connection, the ability to exercise judgment, and the curiosity that goes with it. But what I would love to do is just turn it over to you, Shane. First of all, just thinking about conscious inclusion, psychological safety are important parts, particularly in an industry like yours. And I'm interested in what you're doing around creating the conditions for creativity to thrive at a time like this.
Yeah, it's I have 2 calls today around diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and I had 2 yesterday. So it's a timely topic. We spend a lot of time. We're in the communications business. And we need to understand and represent all cultures in our communication. So we have to have employees that come from all cultures and diverse backgrounds. So it's core to our belief system. It's core to our value proposition. I'm looking here at my second screen, and I've got our objectives and key results. We use that framework. If anybody read the John Doerr book last year, the year before, Measure What Matters. It's a beautiful book about using objectives and key results to prioritize essentially your key initiatives. And we just went through a process over the last 3 weeks to modify pretty aggressively our OKRs to kind of the future proof on the rest of this year, as we know the new normal is upon us. And within that, we have a culture of inclusion and belonging OKR, and I'm reading it here, but continue to expand and amplify our employee-led resource groups, whether that be we've got a future forward one, which is our rising stars, and every office has one, and we give them our employee satisfaction survey that we do quarterly, and we have them interpret it. And they're by design a very diverse group of humans, and then they actually have a budget of time and dollars to invest in solving for some of the issues that always come from an employee feedback loop. We also have just really pushing on inclusion training, and on we've also put our all of our mental health resources that are behind a phone number or a website. We're now pushing those into Microsoft Teams environments where there's classes. You can actually book a counselor on demand, and just trying to make kind of that friction of getting support less. We've also spent more time on using agile methodologies. We have daily stand-ups on every team, in every office, in every functional group. We're very diligent and specific about these are 15-minute calls, no more, no less. They start on time, they end on time, and that we've designed the meetings, when you look at the humans who are there, to have more diversity and inclusion in them. Just even on the gender dynamic alone, if I'm doing a talk to our staff, I always require there's a 50-50 balance on the screen of women and men, and it's a simple design decision, but we did that about 1.5 years ago with stages when we're speaking at town halls. We just adapted that to the digital environment, and we found that that's been a great way to see and really for people to hear from more diverse backgrounds.
Sorry, on mute. was going to actually have a bingo of how many of those we'd have in this session. Catherine, before we move into radical reinvention, talk to me a little bit about, or talk to us about kind of the productivity, the connectivity, the collaboration. You know, how are you maintaining that at CLS at the minute? What are you seeing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we, on a similar basis, really around communication, it's been great to see how we've been able to pull all of our kind of human capital approaches to how we're working in the new normal in with the communications channels. And we've put almost there was a daily cadence of communications out to employees by email, and we have instituted and still having a bi-weekly CEO-led all hands kind of town hall with active Q&A. We have ramped up all our efforts around our mental health campaigns, around our physical well-being. We've kind of had weekly pledges, which the team have put together. All credit to them for coming up with lots of kind of creative ideas about how we collaborate. But pledges are not all just about mental health or physical health. There's ones about reconnecting in with people you would normally see in the office, for those kind of, you know, coffee chats. We had kind of like a shout out week where we were able to kind of send things to employees who'd done really great jobs or had really helped them. So we've really looked at every possible communication channel, and I will say for a workforce that is largely technology risk and kind of compliance, audit related. I mean, we're obviously a heavy tech and risk organization. We've had a lot of positive feedback around the cadence and the content of our communications, which has been really reassuring with that. And I don't think some of these are going to change. You know, going back to what I was saying earlier, we will look at what's worked really well and continue to embed that into our ongoing organization, because that reassurance, again, going back to my earlier point about meeting people where they're at, we have to try and solve for speaking to lots of different personal situations, and how do you tone that, and how do you reassure people that they will be okay, and that, for instance, even when we start thinking about a very slow graduated return to office, that doesn't mean that if people are not able to, that we're going to expect them to. So it's been a real partnership across a number of kind of divisions, but that communication is just you know, has been key to how we've been able to maintain collaboration and, in fact, productivity, because at the end of the day, this is about keeping the organization operating and still delivering on what we need to, and knowing how to inspire people and keep them engaged is key to that.
Yeah. Just on that, Catherine, I'm going to stay with you for a moment or two, just around that inspiring people, because when we were thinking about this session, you talked about the rise of the new leader, and you talked about leaders who have come up through maybe unexpectedly. And I'm interested in, you know, what have you seen? How have they emerged? Just share your insights with us on the rise of the new leader.
Yeah, sure. Yes, it's been, again, one of the really positive things coming through this process over the last 3 months, and I'm sure will continue to evolve, because we are probably only at phase one of our collective response to this global situation. But it's been really interesting, and I'm sure Shane's got some similar observations about, in times of crisis, who kind of steps up and throws themselves in and is calm and measured and can pull things together and can pull people together, and individuals who weren't necessarily on kind of a more formal succession plan previously, who really have kind of risen to a much higher profile in the organization, be they in some functions where they've really had to deliver more. Say, for instance, in some of those groups where we really needed them to be able to design a new operating system, or others who have really stepped up around wanting to do a lot more around kind of our ESG, or wanting to do a lot more around kind of that collaboration. So it's on both the it delivery and on the we in terms of how we operate. But it's been wonderful to see, and long may it continue. And I think it is going to force us to think very differently about how we approach succession planning, leadership development, and again, all for the better, I think. But it's been wonderful to see those people who are really inspired to work even harder to deliver in a crisis.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And just on that theme of radical reinvention, Shane, when we were talking before, you were saying that some of your team are having to think in ways they've never had to think before. And you talked about some of the ways that you're now responding to clients, which is, agile and, experimental in some regards. Can you talk to us a bit about how you've created that?
Yeah, I think having frameworks where people can contribute and rise up, as you say, Catherine, in ways maybe they couldn't pre-COVID, I think is very important. So we're doing with clients, we're bringing them into our dialogue with our staff. So I'm doing a town hall video every month where I'll interview a key client, a chief marketing officer typically, and they'll talk about their business. We'll do some Q&A, and then we do these what are called Thrive briefs, which are it's the value exchange of a client participating in our town hall. We're gonna we call it agency sourcing. Essentially, it's a creative need they might have. So we do all of the mobile apps for Turner Sports. So if you like your PGA golf, you like your March Madness, you like your NBA playoffs. Normally, we would be very busy right now, putting all of that content, live sport content, into mobile apps for every device outside of your TV. Obviously, that's not happening right now. So we had the client in the town hall, and the brief was how can Turner provide sport entertainment in a digital environment with the constraint of not having any new live content. So we co-authored the brief with the client. When I interviewed her in front of 5,000 people, she presented the Thrive brief. And then we said, anybody who's got ideas, you've got 48 hours to bring them to us. And then we curated those down to 15 ideas that we presented to the CMO. And the next week we have a follow-up town hall where she's going to essentially award the ideas that they're going to fund. And that positive feedback loop of the client having direct access, not just to a small subset of our staff, but the entire staff, anybody in the organization be able to respond with ideas regardless of their roles, for those ideas to be considered, for those to be shared, and then to see that materialize into work, which is in this time is as simple as saving jobs. That framework I think is very positive. We also have what we call curiosity sessions, which are 20-minute live and recorded videos in Microsoft Teams for anybody in the organization who has a passion about our craft and the way we do what we do, that wants to share that with each other. And we've seen that, that simple framework of anybody who's curious and has an idea they want to share, here's your format. We've had 150 of those curiosity sessions launch organically without any budget, without any management directives from all over the organization. And some of them are very predictable topics, and some have nothing to do with what we do in our jobs, but it's everything about the humans' personal passion and builds our culture. So we found that to be very, very strong. We've also done what we've called sofa sets, and every Friday we do a live concert from living rooms of musicians. And what we've done is basically just reached out to all the labels that we know, because we put their music into our ads, and said, we'd love you to, we'd love to showcase your artists, and we'd love to put some goodwill out in the world. We went to Salesforce as one of our partners, and they funded the initiative. And we have a beautiful 3-hour concert every Friday. And that's friends, family, agency, clients, anywhere from 20 to 30,000 people show up to it. And we're also showing that that time spent, is also further social distancing. And so we show, essentially the impact on the world by staying home. And it was interesting because I had employees who were very, very proud of this initiative, and I've had a handful that were upset, saying, "Why are we spending time doing this, this art stuff when we need to bill every hour we can and make money?" And I said, "Well, bad on me for not communicating this as a self-funding initiative with a sponsor, but if there's ever time for culture and art, it's now, and we should be proud that we're contributing to that, and we're also translating the audience into raising money for frontline workers, which we have raised a tremendous amount of money." My final point is we do a Friday COVID briefing, and it's essentially for clients around the timing and tonality for communications in the different stages of COVID. And we found that's been very, very successful just by putting ourselves out there. And by design, we have junior people and people from a diverse and inclusive background that we ask them to share their points of view in these briefings. And that's been very, very successful for us to build community, again, change the conversation to something productive versus anxiety ridden. And we're actually winning business just by continuing to emulate and kind of live thought leadership in action.
That's great. I think it's a lovely way to end a Friday, and it's nice also to see kind of the rise of, sometimes the best comes out of people in times of crisis. I'm just going to pause for a second to say, we will move over to questions on the Q&A, but there's just one last piece we want to talk about a bit around rebuilding and leading the transformation. So if you have any questions, please get them in ASAP, and we'll get to that in a moment or two's time. So the last piece we wanted to move to was talking about rebuilding. What does the leading the transformation look like? And I said we would come back to this piece around adapting, because adapting is about the capacity to incorporate learning to evolve with the changing context. And I think that that's really, really important, because this is going to be a continuous piece for us going forward. And I just want to turn it to Catherine and to Shane. Just talk to us a bit about what opportunities have opened up for you as a result of this pandemic, and what are you seeing in the post-pandemic future, and what's the future going to look like for CLS and for Wunderman Thompson? But Catherine, if I could start with you, please.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, in these times, kind of hope and optimism sometimes take a little bit of a battering, and I think it's really important that we, as leaders, work really hard to maintain and to instill and then maintain, a spirit of purpose and optimism. And I think I'm lucky, and you too are, Shane, to have an organisation that clearly has a well-defined purpose, and so we're able to bring people along that, because that doesn't change. The reality, though, is that the future of work is going to change, and I think certainly myself and my team are very excited about that. So we're actually seeing it as an opportunity to rethink how we operate as an organization. And because I have the pleasure of having the 3 different functions that kind of all integrate quite well, as we look at this, we are doing a lot of the advanced planning to be able to then help the exec team kind of come along that journey. Because, as I said earlier, there are various stages of, well, I'm sure in a few months we'll just all be back to normal, versus some of us who are thinking that, we have to stop thinking that return is, the destination, because that's not the case. So we are you know, already thinking about the new skills we need in the organization. It was very clear. I think someone's posted a question on the Q&A already about were any of you really ready with your BCP planning? And the reality is I think all of us are going to have to look much more organizationally at kind of resilience and move away from having kind of business continuity plans that looked at your division and everybody had a call tree, and it's completely different. So what skills do we need in the organization to deliver our service and our mission to the market that we might not have needed before? We have to rethink how we assess people, reward people. You referenced earlier, you know, about performance management needing to change, because those old ways of assessing productivity and effectiveness are going to change. And obviously the most basic one is where people are working is going to change. And certainly for us, we've got some ways to go to make our technology infrastructure as seamless as what we believe is needed for a truly distributed workforce. So I'm looking at it as a real opportunity to do some really good thinking and planning and shift the organization into the new reality.
Great, thank you. And Shane, to you, what's going to be different in post-pandemic world in Wunderman Thompson?
Yeah, my daily question is what's better now versus before COVID, and I ask that question throughout the day, and I write it down. I've got a big old list. And then I simply say, let's do more of that. At the core for us, you know, a distributed operating model is kind of become the mantra the last 4 weeks of really kind of shifting from, you know, we were all at an office, now we're all at home, and we'll have some hybrid going back. You know, a distributed operating model is more of a design system to say, you know, functionally, where should capabilities be? You know, as far as scale, as far as geography, and then how do we minimize the friction of, you know, if you've got a question and somebody has the best answer, you know, what are the obstacles to get to that person in the most you know, simple and frictionless way? So we've been testing things like having, almost like in university with the professors who had office hours. And maybe some of us went to those office hours and many of us did not, myself included. But having office hours for our, you know, our world's best specialists, where, you know, if you've got a question about a mobile app or about SEO or about a social platform, that our experts have times of the day that they're available on Teams. They have no distractions. And so when you have a need internally, when you're meeting with, you know, with your agency team, or if you're working with a client, we can literally just pull in that expert without having to, you know, go through 6 different layers of approval to find that person. And we found that you know, that has just been a more integrated work in this distributed environment. And I think the people that are providing those you know, kind of those knowledge services, they love it because their time is spent on what they're the best at, rather than, you know, about time spent on how do they get into those meetings when they're going to be asked for their advice. And so we're finding more and more a distributed model makes sense. We're also looking to the future state of both location and also travel, that for our leading experts, we don't want them traveling as much as they were before, because the opportunity cost is so great. We actually believe our quality has gotten better of work because essentially our most senior people who were spending 30, 40, 50% of their time on a plane, they're now working, right? They're now more productive. They're more available. I've been surveying our more junior leaders, and they've said on the positive side, they get course corrected much earlier, and so they're not wasting time chasing something that their boss didn't want them to do. On the other side of it, I think the watch out is the thumb, right? The oversight and at times even micromanagement that we have because we have nothing else going on but looking at these screens all day. I've been really pushing my more senior leaders to be balanced in their oversight and balanced in giving people space and balance and empowerment. But I think that new normal, I think when we look at business travel, instead of flying last minute to go see it, to go to a meeting you think is critical, but it's only an hour and it takes you 2 days, we'll probably be jumping on video a lot more. So what we're talking about is how do we design the physical interactions when we have like a client meeting to say, let's make that all about community and culture and human goodwill. Because I think that's, and so if you can have fewer, physical events, but go deeper and have more meaning behind them, that probably is going to be a net benefit for everybody, both professionally and personally. You say once a quarter, I'm going to go hear a great speaker, do an activity with people that I need to work with remotely, and get those human bonds and not be distracted by kind of the death march of PowerPoint conferences that I think we've all kind of become the norm. I see a net benefit there as well.
Yeah. And it's great to see that actually, they say don't let a good crisis go to waste, that actually we are able to affect change and do some things that maybe we couldn't or wouldn't do in peacetime, as it were, that we can now have the opportunity to make happen. I've got an eye on the clock, and I just want to ask a final question of both Catherine and Shane. The question is, if there was one kind of lesson that your leaders have learned through this, what is it? And has there been anything that has surprised you through this time? Catherine, shall we go to you first?
I think our leaders are learning a lot, and will continue to do so. I think what has surprised many of them is how much more they're needing to lead, how much more time they are needing to spend, as I referenced earlier, kind of meeting people where they're at, making sure that they know how everyone in their organization is and how they're doing. And that need to kind of lead with humanity. I think that's been a shift for some people, because we all lead differently and others do that more intuitively than others. I just, we are looking to see how we can embed that as part of our future of work. So how do we really shift our culture, and certainly our leaders are on that journey with us. And I think it'd be interesting, honestly, if we were to reconvene this group in 3 or 4 months and see how things have evolved, because I think we make decisions based on the information that we have at any one time. And that's constantly evolving. But going back to your authenticity, I think that's the most important thing, because we will ultimately be a more sustainable, resilient and productive organization if we can create that culture.
Thank you. Thank you. Shane, a lesson and a surprise perhaps?
Humans are awesome. Humans are, and I think that prioritizing culture of how your business strategy aligns with your values, with aligns with your behaviors. When I think about the standout moments of the last 3 months, it is really where those things connect, where you've got somebody passionate about a vision, they put themselves out there with a point of view, they've been empowered to do something about that, and people support that. I think the focus on culture has almost been required, as we're staring at each other in home offices that are, my New York team, the running joke is, does anybody have an office that's not a door that they've put in their bedroom horizontally to have as a makeshift setup, because their partner is using the one desk they have, and I think having that humility to say, yeah, I hacked something together, and we're not too fancy about it. I think, to me, that's all authenticity, and that's all human connection. And I also think everybody's so concerned with job security that I've never seen a more compliant group of humans, right? That are all in to do anything that they think it will help the business. And I think, you know, what I'm trying to do is pace people so that, you know, this is not a sprint. And I'm nervous of that hybrid when we go back into the offices and losing some of this. And so this morning I had a call where I said, you know, we've got a huge Latin American organization that we partner with. And I said, we've never been better at partnering with our nearshore teams because, you know, we're all on an equal level playing field. Let's not lose that. And let's also look at the next, you know, call it between now and July 1. You know, while we still are more or less captive behind our screens in our houses, you know, every bit of learning, every bit of community that it's better in this remote environment, let's accelerate those and prioritize those meetings now, so that when we're going back into the offices, you know, it's going to be a huge distraction and harder to get everybody synchronized on these videos. And so we're really trying to focus on that as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So I think actually that comment you made about this is a marathon, not a sprint, is actually kind of a useful frame, and also that one to be able to extract out the best of, because I think that will be defining as we go forward into or continue into this. You know, we're slightly over on time. I apologize for that, but I would like to say thank you to Tamara, to Holly, and to Nicolina from British American Business, to Andrea from Invest NI, and to Catherine and to Shane. Thank you so much for your time, for your insights, and for sharing with us, you know, what you're learning and what you're doing. It's hugely appreciated. Thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.